Hi, I'm curious if you can and are willing to share with us actually how those get unloaded. The container didn't look too large, so I'm wondering how often does that have to be unloaded? And that container that guy was carrying toward the toilet didn't seem that big. Like how many trips a day? And to get 3,800 tons, is that?
Yeah. We love people thinking about the details of poop and poop management. It's what we think about all day long. So, So there's a very good reason why we've designed it that way. So as I mentioned, the access is very poor into these communities. In a lot of areas, you can't even take wheelbarrows or any type of vehicles in. So it has to be something that somebody can actually physically seal and carry out. And that limits you to about 25, 30 kilos. And that's why the containers are that size that they are. But interestingly, they can handle up to 100 uses a day. And what we found is it's actually physically hard to fit more than 100 people through a toilet in a single day. So that's how we've sort of thought about what's the optimal size for a particular, for the sanitation system. So the collection happens on a daily basis, and that's primarily because we're limited with access, and it has to be, the sort of package size that can be taken out by an individual. But because our area of operation is so small, it's probably smaller than the size of, so 2 square miles, 500,000 people. It's not, the density is what allows us to do this cost effectively.
And that's where all 500 are?
Yeah.
Hey, I actually have a two-part question. The first is actually that you guys mentioned that there are some other options in terms of sanitation toilets and stuff. And one of you guys pointed out that it costs a few shillings to use them. How does that price compare to these facilities?
Okay. Essentially the same. So we don't mandate a particular price for our franchisees, for the Fresh Life operators. We encourage them to basically take the market price that exists in their neighborhood. That is either taking that exact same price that you may have for those lovely options that I showed, or sometimes they may charge like 1 shilling more if the other options are far less. I think a couple things to note besides that I failed to mention earlier, besides the toilet itself, obviously being a better user experience, cleaner, safer, et cetera. But also, all of our franchisees are required to meet, just like you have in any franchise, we have very specific standards that they have to comply with, which of course include things around cleanliness and customer service, but also specific products. They have to have water and soap for hand washing, and they have to have toilet tissue and sawdust because it's a dry toilet. So whatever that price point is that they've set, they're also providing those additional products and services beyond which you wouldn't have at any of those other options. You said there were 2 questions?
Oh, yes. And the second question is, what percentage of waste are you guys able to process into, either fertilizer or energy or whatever?
So effectively, we have the capability to process all of it. There's a little bit of capital equipment we're waiting on to process 100% of the urine, but 100% of the feces we already process into organic fertilizer. We have some interesting partnerships with a company in Switzerland, an organization in Switzerland that's developed some technology to convert the urine into high-quality fertilizer as well. So we're able to do that at a lab scale right now, but in the next few months, we'll be able to do that at commercial scale as well.
Thank you.
So you have this really comprehensive model, and I was just wondering if you could speak a little to how you developed this. Did you have a team? Were you just spitballing off each other? How did this come about?
I mean, what we do is really adapt models or technologies that we've seen work elsewhere, but in a very different context. So, I mean, if you think about what we're doing, it's really very similar to the solid waste management that happens at Grinnell, right? I mean, you have your garbage can, you put it outside, somebody comes, picks it up, takes it somewhere to a central facility where it's processed, recycled, whatever. It's not your problem, But for you as a user, it's very convenient, and that's why your city is clean, and it's but the service is also very affordable and accessible for you, and that's essentially what we're trying to put together, but for sanitation rather than solid waste management. So, it's not, sort of these huge revelations we had while sitting on a toilet one day, but really about, having a very structured examination of how, what is causing cities in U.S. and Europe, for example, to be clean. And actually, an interesting piece of history that in the U.S., this all started actually with Ben Franklin. Among many other things that he put together and he created in this country, the solid waste management system was something that he started in Philadelphia, where the government was once again failing to keep the city clean. Somehow, I think Philadelphia has returned to this. No offense, Kia, but where he just started, hiring a bunch of people that he was willing to pay to clean up the streets, collect all the refuse, and take it away to somewhere else. And then the municipalities, governments slowly adopted that as part of their responsibility, and that's really what we're trying to create as well in Kenya. Is private sector organizations coming in, starting to provide a basic service that then becomes part of the system, part of the machinery that keeps societies going. So again, we're not reinventing the wheel; we're just making it cool again, I guess. But yeah, it was all. It's largely adapting that. Even a lot of the technology we use, we don't create any new science in waste conversion. We do a lot of applied engineering. The waste processing technology from Singapore that I showed you was used to process slaughterhouse waste in Singapore. We kind of checked it out and we said, well, actually this can also do human waste. And we said, okay, let's try it out and have a very methodical process towards testing it out, testing out lab scale versions and then doing a commercial scale. So.
I've been told to check to see if the mic is actually on here. How would you? Because it's not feeding through.
There. You got
There. Okay. So first off, just awesome work, great stuff you guys are doing, and love to see a franchise model being applied in this context. It's really cool. My question is, as far as community relationships and what you've learned about your operators and their connections in terms of family and friends and relationships in the community, and how or whether that comes to bear on their ability to actually collect payments. Like, do you find that they have a hard time getting their neighbors to pay, or their cousin or their uncle, or how does that affect their ability to be effective as operators and to achieve financial goals, or does it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I guess to back up, sort of to the implicit part, part of the reason why we have set up as a franchise model is because of the local knowledge and the local relationships that our operators have, and therefore everything from kind of the land rights issues that they can navigate much more effectively than, say, I could, and the kind of incentives that are aligned in them being able to own and operate a business in their community, and their neighbors then actually wanting them to succeed. So it's also really important to us that it's clear to the end users that that facility, that business, it is owned and operated, and all of the revenues are going to that franchisee and not to us. We do have, as part of our the package that we sell includes the services, and so we do have a flat service fee. But unlike many franchise models, we intentionally don't take a percentage kind of royalty, because we want to kind of give them all the upside potential on the revenues that they would generate. It is a really good question. What we actually see, and I've never thought, this is a little bit almost the opposite of kind of where the question's going, which is that our end users really value the kind of what we call flexibility of payment that they receive from an operator that they know, and whether they know them previously as a friend or family member, or just know them now as their friendly neighborhood toilet operator, and kind of develop that local business relationship with them. We've seen that some of our operators that have the most success and the highest kind of customer satisfaction from their users do allow a sort of not necessarily less payment or non-payment sometimes, but kind of delayed payment. So if you can imagine, you're using this facility once or twice, maybe even 3 times a day, and you kind of forgot to put your change in your pocket. Same thing that you probably experience at a kind of a small business that you frequent often. And you just kind of come up to the cash register and you realize your couple dollars short, and you know that person, and they can say, all right, go ahead, and I'm sure when you come back tomorrow, you can make up the difference. So that's the kind of thing that where it happens, and we certainly don't mandate that. We found that it actually has really positive impacts, both obviously for the end users access that they can now get, even if they forgot and maybe a little bit short that day, and actually in the sort of reciprocity that they then become that much more of kind of loyal customers and in fact kind of ambassadors for that business. We've seen, we've been doing some really in-depth market research, kind of observational at some of the facilities, and in one case where one of our operators has about 10 or so people that she very consciously gives this kind of credit to. They've really kind of unintentionally become these brand ambassadors that actively recruit new people from the neighborhood, physically bring them to that location and say, oh, you have to try this toilet, you have to meet this person, she's so great. Because they've kind of gotten that small benefit that ultimately didn't cost the operator anything. It was just a bit of delay. That said, to your original question, it is always a concern. We definitely don't want our operators to feel kind of squeezed into unprofitable situations because of those kind of local community dynamics. And I guess short answer is, for the most part, we don't see that happening, kind of at least not systemically. Great.
Do you plan to grow, and if so, do you have projections on how you'll grow?
We're world domination of toilets is our goal. We are looking most immediately at Tanzania and Ethiopia as the most likely realistic targets for expansion late 2015. But I think something that'll come up tomorrow as well, one of the big hindrances to making this all happen is actually regulation. Government is our best and worst friend and enemy. I don't know what, frenemy, I guess. So what we've learned from our experience in Nairobi, in Nairobi we were able to just kind of do it and beg for forgiveness later as the model came up and people saw the impact of it. But one of the main things we try to set up now when we evaluating new cities is how supportive is the local government and the national government to actually pass policies and regulations ahead of our entry into the market to actually make it very clear that private sector is allowed to provide these sanitation services into these communities, because that's really the problem. Is there's nothing that says we can't, but there's nothing that says we can, and that's when you become victim to lots of government irregularities, if you can call it that. And that's what we don't want to get into the position of. So that's why it takes us a long time to actually expand, is that we're willing to wait it out. If a government's not willing to change the laws, then we'll go elsewhere, and that's perfectly fine with us. But just to give you an idea though of just the market in Nairobi itself, there's 1.75 million people in Nairobi slums. We're at serving approximately roughly 25,000 users a day. We have a long way to go, even if we stayed put in where we are.
My question builds on a couple of the last few, where I'd love to hear more about how you got started in Kenya. This seems like it'd be a challenging project wherever you were, but I'm assuming you didn't have a lot of knowledge of Kenya beforehand. And I'd love to hear how you got the local knowledge, whether it's the connections of people who could, be franchisees, whether it's the legal knowledge, whether it's some of the cultural knowledge that would be shaping what you're doing. How did you learn all that?
It's frankly through immersion in a lot of different ways, whether that's ourselves personally spending time on the ground. We spent 6 months of our 2 years in grad school, we actually spent in Kenya on the ground, working with, whether that's governments, NGOs, private companies, people living in the communities themselves. The whole toilet design was co-created with people from the community, trying to understand what are the features and what makes for a delightful experience in a toilet. So I think all of those, Kenya in itself, and I think most communities in the world, just like Grinnell, Iowa, is extremely friendly and open to helping other people understand what they're about. And I think we found that to be a universal truth. So when we actually went and spent time in the communities, people were actually inviting us into their house and and helping us integrate into the community so we can learn more about it. So that's definitely one way that, us ourselves, you're absolutely right. We had never been to Kenya before we started thinking about Sanergy. Kenya was a very structured choice, and I can get into that in a bit. But once we decided on it, the way we got through it was spending time on the ground and hiring really smart, amazing people that are from those communities, are from Kenya, that know a lot more about all this than we do. And I think that's a rule for any organization, any startup, is surround yourselves with people that are much smarter than you, and you'll go much farther than trying to do it yourself. So that's definitely how we're doing it with 180 other really smart people that know about this more than we do. The reason we isolated Kenya is very structured. Again, it's existing market for paid sanitation services that we didn't need to create. With people are paying for very terrible options. We could go in there, but with what we didn't know what exactly the engineering solution was going to be, but we were very confident we could come up with it. And so that's made it much easier to shift, to tap into an existing market. And then on the back end, which is the byproduct side, because of a lack of domestic production of fertilizers and energy and so on, the prices are twice as high. And the reason for the price differential is primarily transport and tariffs from the imports. So if we could produce something domestically, we could be financially sustainable much faster than in an environment where that pricing structure didn't exist. So most of East Africa and some parts of West Africa face the same market dynamics, and we see that as ready markets for us to expand into.
Hi. I have a two-part question. First of all, I was wondering if your organic fertilizer program, you're allowing that to be driven by local entrepreneurs like you were with the toilet program. And yeah, I guess go for that first.
We'd love to. We haven't figured out exactly how to do that because the manufacturing requires, as you can imagine, there's very high standards to meet. So the EPA, for example, has something called a biosolids Class A standard that we need to meet. And it's really hard to do that at small scale. You need these economies of scale to happen. We see franchising as a potential at a city or a country level where we would sort of franchise the model and the technology together and the standard operating procedures and give it to someone, but we haven't yet figured out how to do that at sort of the scale that we do micro-franchising on the toilet side, primarily because of both the technical complexity of the processes and the standards and the high quality that need to be maintained. That's difficult to do. And just as an aside on this, the conversion of human waste or sludge or whatever you call it into fertilizer is extremely common. And actually, the U.S. is the biggest leader of it. Milwaukee's been doing it for 60 years. Houston, Austin, Boston, Washington, D.C., all these cities are doing it, even if it's not what's in the news. And a lot of it is actually sold retail in Home Depot and other home and garden shops, as well as to large farms. So what we're doing is not sort of unprecedented, or that there's no strict standards. It's very regulated in the U.S. and Europe. We're trying to apply those guidelines to what we're doing in the U.S. But sorry, you had a second part.
Well, I think just to sort of point out that even though the production of the fertilizer isn't done right now by kind of at that micro level, that the benefits of the fertilizer certainly are. So we do still, it is in some ways still a kind of business to business relationship on the fertilizer side as well, because the sales are targeted at farms that are kind of middle to small, and working with distributors who reach small scale farmers, and this is an input to their business. So it's not the production of the fertilizer, but obviously the use and thinking about that not as a kind of retail consumer, but as a business person who's using this as an input to their processes.
Awesome. My second question, going back to your presentation, you had that image about how the waste is transported through the economy. And you also had like a side thing going to energy, but you guys didn't talk about energy. And I was wondering if you were planning on doing that based on your past.
Yeah, so we have a lot of products in our R&D pipeline. We have about a team of about 10 people in our R&D team. So we have energy through gas generation, biogas, methane generation, energy through syngas generation, charcoal, animal feed, some other synthetic fertilizers, as well as in the future, plastics and diesel and so on. So there's a lot of things in the pipeline that we're doing. Our intent with energy is to build a very large-scale power plant, and we're sort of about 2 years away. All of that prep work to get to that design, to get to that large-scale plant is happening right now. So when we're back in 2 years, we'll show you all the pictures for what that looks like. But large-scale energy generation is definitely possible and feasible and happening all over the place already, whether that's through landfills or through wastewater treatment plants. Thanks.
Any more questions? Anyone else? Well, let's say thank you one more time.